So this Christian band that I was in eventually ended up breaking up around the beginning of the year. And I remember as it was going on, there was just a lot of turmoil that was taking place. And as the band had officially called it quits, I had gone over to this, my old friend's house to collect my gear. And lo and behold, there's a preacher over there who's from one of these healing ministries, and he's trying to tell us, stay in this band. I don't want you to leave. This is what God wants you to do. And then he says things along the lines of, "Oh well, Christians in bands, all they want to do is party and like have sex and do drugs and all that stuff." So, needless to say, I did not listen to him. Just packed up my stuff and left. And then he comes out, taps me on the shoulder and says, I think those two other kids that are doing this with you aren't really Christians, but I see something else in you. And at this point, I was a little intrigued, but of course, because I had so badly wanted to get out of the situation, I said, I'm not interested in doing this anymore. So for those 4 or 5 months that I just pretty much wasn't, really doing much, I had continued going to the church that I was at, where, the pastor had gotten arrested. And then once, I'm going to say maybe that summer came along, I had gotten a new job. So I figured, hey, now's my chance to, leave the church. So I think the immature thing on my part to do was to go and take this to Facebook and tell everybody, "Hey, I'm leaving. Haha, bye bye. See you later. I hope you have more fun without me," or whatever, stupid beta bitch thing I said at that point was. And some people were upset. Some people were like, "Well, why are you leaving?" And I basically made it very clear, but I probably could have handled it a little better at that point. I just still felt like I was being psychologically abused in some cases because, there were some very bad falling outs with people that I can't quite compress into a 10-minute video altogether. And at that point, I just said to myself, you know what, time to leave. I had gotten this job, and of course, there was this girl that I was still interested in, which eventually, thankfully, I did get over her. But of course, knowing my stupid heart, I eventually ended up, liking another girl. But it turned out a lot better, even though I never dated this one, than any other crush that I had in my church days had turned out. And when I had left, I was seldomly talk to people during those 4 or 5 months that I was still attending that church. But when I left, when I really knew that I had made the right decision and at least leaving the church for the first time, was that people were shunning me. I mean, people were just, I would see somebody in public and they would maybe say 3 sentences to me, and then that was it. And it was heartbreaking. It really was heartbreaking because I had invested so much time, energy, and effort into these people and into this church over the years, that for them to just basically take what I thought I was doing with thought I was doing God's work and all, and just it was trashed. It was garbage. And at that point, I just kind of said to myself, it's like, wow, I can't believe I spent all of this time working towards something that just didn't mean anything. And of course, that was my first thoughts of, well, this is it for me, this is the end for me, where of course coming into play as far as the church goes, I hadn't really been attending, I had not really attended church very much in that time frame. And then of course, lo and behold, I get a call from, guess who, the kid who I was doing the band with. We had reformed it at that point with, different people, and then eventually that was just also a falling out too, because I just realized I couldn't do this, and that he hadn't really, matured very much. I hate to talk negatively about people, but when you have these kinds of stories that are just influenced by people from the church who just, act so negatively in that way, it's very difficult to not say something that could sound like a put down or be offensive. And as far as just the rest of, after, I'm going to say this is probably around like Christmas had rolled around, so this would have been a year after like the whole molestation thing happened, that I got into a pretty big fight with this person over, because I had gotten a new job. It was in a mall. It was the holidays. There was no way I'd be able to like play these shows they wanted me to play. And then I just pretty much decided, I'm probably just going to leave the band anyways. And so luckily I got out of that, and then it was the year after I had done that, just all this thoughts in my head basically about, what have I become, what have I done? I felt so bad that, I was this, I felt like I was a monster, and that it was like a past life for me. I didn't, it was very difficult for me to ultimately be able to forgive myself above, forgiving others. And I had hatred in myself. There was just like bad things that I thought. I mean, I would have these dreams where it was just, they would make us do this speech evangelism thing in high school where you go up to people and be like, hey, have you heard the good news of Jesus or something like that? And then I just had these dreams of doing that and just wake up and feel like an awful son of a bitch. I mean, I feel like for the most part, I've almost had to re-brainwash myself in some ways because the person who I was when I was going to church is just so much different than the person who I am now. And, I believe that as far as I'm a much more loving person now than I am when I was attending church. And there are a lot of, things about myself is that I've suddenly been able to accept. I've been able to accept my flaws. I've been able to, I've had better success as far as girls goes. I can be free with myself. I can, just so many better things that were happening at that point after I had left that church. So we fast forward to about, I'm going to say maybe 8 months later. I decided I'm going to give this church thing another try. Of course, I had gone to a college group which had like 400, 500 kids or something like that, I was invited to by a friend of a friend, I believe. And I went, I thought it was pretty cool. I decided, hey, I'll keep going to this. But the more and more that I went, the thing is that, I mean, I understand, I guess you could say, like, teenagers and whatnot being somewhat, distant or brainwashed. But the problem was that I was going somewhere that had, like, 400, 500, college students a night, and these people were just, like, clones of each other. I mean, it was like you would walk around and you would just see them like breaking out in like song and dance and prayer and just, all of this other stuff that you would expect to see in like, I guess you could say like a revival place or a healing center. So, I mean, it was very, very strange. And I just remember there was one night where I met this one kid who talked to me for like 20 minutes about like, don't do drugs, don't do pot, don't do alcohol, don't have sex. And it was a very uncomfortable experience. And I think that was one of the things that was just incredibly the last straw in me wanting anything to do with any sort of religion. I think that for me was the most interesting experience because he just talked for me for like 20 minutes about like this and that and just went from like all these topics and everything. And at that point I just knew to myself, wow, these people are actually more brainwashed than my old church. I need to get the fuck out of here. So, of course, that was, I believe, the last time that I had ended up going. And at that point, I had been very, it was difficult for me because I had built my entire foundation on, attending a church for, the last couple of years of my life. So now I'm at this point where it's like, what do I do? And I had still had these thoughts and just ideas of, people who I used to like not even maybe be friends with, but just also be in contact with and whatnot. And just, I was very, very angry. And sometimes I still get those thoughts. But at the same time, despite being so angry, I'm so much happier now. Because I can look at myself in the mirror and I can say, you know what? I like myself. I like this man who I'm becoming. Whether I am in a church or whether I'm, mostly not in a church, but you get the idea of what I'm saying because I'm free now. This is what being free is. It's being able to choose, what you want for yourself instead of looking at other people and an entire congregation and being like, this is what you're supposed to do. So for me, that was when I first really felt freedom. I had been out of high school for several years. I had, basically, I was better. And a couple of years before that, luckily I had thrown away the Christian CDs and finally got some good music like Daniel Johnston, like Elliott Smith, and like Pavement. So that's been a lot of fun for me also. I'll pick this back up in part 3.